And a very good evening to you, and you're very welcome to the Green Zone Updates from Jerusalem Conversations with Eugene Doyle. And where are we going? Sorry. Oh, yeah. Tonight's webinar is aimed particularly at Irish viewers and listeners who, in many cases, only receive one dominant narrative about Israel, terrorism, and the Middle Eastern politics, usually a highly negative, one-sided narrative. This program is not about telling people what to think. It is about presenting facts, analysis, and perspectives that are often entirely absent from Irish and European mainstream discussion, allowing viewers to make up their own minds. Tonight, the title of the webinar is Wide-Eyed in Jerusalem, Abandoned in Tehran. Where does the new US-Iran deal leave Israel? We examine one of the most consequential developments in the Middle East since the recent conflict between Israel and Iran. A new memorandum of understanding and emerging diplomatic framework between Washington and Tehran is beginning to take shape. Yet, many of the details remain unclear, many of the consequences uncertain, and many of the questions unanswered. Israel is not a party to this arrangement. Nevertheless, it may find itself living with the consequences for years to come. For many Israelis, there is a sense of disbelief. After military operations that significantly damaged Iran's capabilities, are they now witnessing the emergence of an agreement that limits Israel's freedom of action against future threats? Are hard-won gains being consolidated or potentially diluted? At the same time, many ordinary Iranians who hoped pressure on the regime would lead to meaningful change are expressing deep disappointment, wondering whether their aspirations have once again been subordinated to international diplomacy. Tonight, we ask whether Donald Trump has delivered a strategic masterstroke, whether he has repeated some of the mistakes critics associate with previous agreements, and what all of this means for Israel, Iran, Lebanon, and the wider region. Joining me from Jerusalem is Donny Fuchs, loving father, writer, idealist, has a passion for wilderness and wildlife, strength training, self-defense, reading, writing, horror films, and doom metal. In his writing, Donny covers Jewish issues, religion and politics, nature, fiction, general content. Also joining us is fellow Irishman, co-producer of The Green Zone and regular panelist, Marco Alexander. Gentlemen, a very, very good evening to you, both of you.
Good evening to you.
Good evening.
Now, before we begin, if you're watching on YouTube or Facebook, please subscribe to the channel, leave a comment with your views, and share this program with others who are interested in understanding the rapidly changing realities of the Middle East. Now, you remember last week that Marco and I said we were going to introduce a new fact versus fiction segment, if you like, as there's only one narrative in Ireland's, and it's usually fiction. So here's this week's clip.
So we lie and we cheat and we claim things that are not part of Islam. And guess what? Not all of them are dumb. They can tell when we lie. They can tell when someone sits behind it that says, Islam is peace. Islam is about peace. Why are you afraid to tell the people the truth? Whoa. Don't you think this kafir is going to open the Quran, read Surah Al-Anfal, and he's going to come across these ayat, the military ayat, which you've been trying to hide? Then what are you going to do?
Wow, he just said the quiet bit out loud.
He did. He said the quiet bit out loud. I love this guy for being honest.
What's going on here?
He's admitting that Islam is violent. It's about conquering and subjugating the world. It's not a religion of peace. The Quran is very clear that Muslims are to be violent. They're to hate the disbelievers. Surah 98 says that we are the worst of creatures. Muslims are not to be allies with.
And there you have it there. That's our clip for this week. And if you want to read more on that, read chapter 8 of the Quran, and you'll see that what we're saying is not fake news, but actual fact. Marco, I'm going to come to you first. Just a breaking story in Israel. For the first time in Israel's history, the government has publicly said it will not obey a ruling of the High Court of Justice. Many commentators are describing this as a potential constitutional crisis. What's this about, Marco?
Well, in essence, it's the continuation of the clash between the High Court and the legitimately elected government of Israel. And this is just one in a series of incidents. During the course of the week, the High Court ruled that the election of the state comptroller was invalid and that it had to be held again. And of course, this comes on the back of the judicial reform crisis. So there's nothing new here. The problem in Israel is that the High Court, during the course of the past few decades, has arrogated to itself powers which do not belong to it. So it has basically deformed Israeli democracy, and we saw the tragic consequences in the past 3 years. That's not to say that these things wouldn't have happened, but obviously our enemies certainly exploited the mayhem caused by the Supreme Court and its allies in the media and in academia. So what we see in reality is just another in a series of clashes between the legitimately elected government and the Supreme Court and its allies in what we've come to know as the deep state. So this is a continuation of the battle. Fortunately, the government is summoning up some courage at long last and telling the Supreme Court that this is not a legitimate act and it is indeed an abuse of power. And perhaps we could even go a little bit further and say a perversion of the course of justice, at which the Supreme Court has shown great ability in the past few years.
Wow. Johnny, have you any view on it yourself, or do you know what?
Oh, yes, absolutely. First of all, well stated, Marco. I know we've had these discussions years ago, even before this madness, but it's a tragedy because Israel fancies itself the only democracy in the Middle East. And unfortunately, there are these elements that really cripple it and prevent it from truly being so. And this is really from the onset of the state. A lot of these socialist ideals and big government that have never really been fully removed. I know Menachem Begin. He tried to make inroads into this as well as Netanyahu, but the leftist courts are really determined to shape it in their image, and it's a scary thing because we saw what this dysfunction society for a real desire to have rights and to curtail government in a very healthy way was just subdued.
Okay, thanks for that, Donny. Now let's move to our main discussion, and we're looking at segment one. And Donny, you're very familiar with this memorandum of understanding and 14 points that are in it. Can you just tell our listeners in a brief way what exactly is contained in this memorandum of understanding?
So it's very funny because it's called the MOU, the Memorandum of Understanding, and many bright minds, legal scholars, and people who are adept in diplomacy have looked at this and called it a memorandum of misunderstanding. It is very unclear. Some of the shrewdest minds, both legal, political, have analyzed this, and they don't know what to make of it because it's a memorandum. It's not a contract. It basically, it's comprised of 14 points basically, and some of them are contradictory. They're unclear. So for example, one of the early ones is immediate and permanent cessation of hostilities. What does that even mean? Like, we've seen that in the most rudimentary sense. Like that hasn't even held for one day. Iran sends drones, and they're going after the Gulf states or Israel or American bases or using Hezbollah as their proxy. Like, it's vague. It's almost like a child wrote it. It seems to be the fantasy world of poor diplomats, essentially business people, Witkoff and Kushner, who are really not qualified. They don't understand Islam. And again, this goes back to the fact of have we basically handed our victory to Iran? This great military success has become a diplomatic failure. And it seems like, people talking about perhaps he's engaged in 3D chess. But this looks like something a child would put together. It is confusing. 60-day periods to negotiate a final agreement. What to do with, it doesn't even include a lot of the initial points of the war. It's very unclear with the uranium what's going to be done. That was the whole thing to stop the nuclear. I look at this, and it is something a child would write, and not a very intelligent child.
Okay. And Donny, just this is a question I've asked before. I mean, various American presidents have been dealing with Iran over the last number of decades in relation to their behavior and their threat to America, their threat to Israel, their threat to the region and the West itself. And is it not bizarre that Americans still don't know what Islam is actually thinking here? Because we had this on last week's program where it was said that Islamists will never see themselves as never see anyone else as equal to them at a table around a negotiating table, and therefore they will never agree to what the American is looking for. I mean, is it possible that Americans over these decades haven't realized what they're dealing with here in Iran, and that he should have kept going when he was bombing them to the Stone Age, should he not?
Oh, I agree entirely, and I think indeed that most Americans do not know. As we know, most people are not necessarily knowledgeable in Islam or geopolitics in general, and they don't really understand Islam. That hasn't really been taught, and this goes to the education process in America, which has increasingly become radical over the last 30, 40 years, and the influence of Qatar assets into our education system. Most Americans don't know. And of those who know, there are people with animus towards Jews, hatred of America as well. They do not understand Islam. I truly believe it. But more tragic is that our leaders, including President Trump, who did a very brave thing by doing something that no other president has done, and yet everything is transactional with him. He truly does not understand the ideology. It's not business. These are not, when he speaks, and if they want to turn a leaf, they can prosper. Who doesn't think Iran could prosper? It's a beautiful country. It's got history. It's got nature. It's got industry. It's got brilliant minds, and it's got a lot of good people who are suffering. They don't want this. Shia Islam, and Islam in general, but in this case, Shiaism, is not interested in your fantasies and your living well. Of course they would live well. It's a fundamental failure to understand, and it's not just the layperson, but it's the politicians and the scholars and the thought leaders and the academics, and it's a very scary thing. I don't think America fully understands the dangers of Islam, and it's on its shores now.
Marco, do you want to jump in there about any of that, about what you're seeing in the 14 points? Because it's very interesting that Donny says it looks like something written by a child.
An ignorant child, I think. I think Donny's perfectly right. The problem with the American administration at the current moment is you have different strands within it. You have, as Donny correctly mentioned, businessmen who see everything in terms of a deal. These are not people you can make a deal with. Now, this is complicated further by the fact not only do they think in terms of a deal, but they have very questionable relationships with the Qatari regime, which is a major sponsor of terrorism and which has penetrated academia and the financial system of Western Europe and indeed the United States. So they've indeed poisoned the well. Now, the problem is, as we've mentioned before, is when you get into an illicit relationship, and indeed many elements within the United States and Europe have become embroiled with these very murky regimes, it's very difficult to pull away. They are subject to a certain extent to blackmail of some sort. And this is complicating matters with the Trump administration. Now, Trump, I think, is a well-meaning person, but obviously he's got people behind him who are pulling him in very curious directions. Indeed, one only has to think about his admiration for Erdogan in Turkey and al-Julani, his proxy in Syria. But these people are essentially jihadists. So President Trump has got himself into a bit of a pickle, put it that way.
Okay, just before we go on, just say good evening to Otta there. Very good evening to you and welcome back as usual, Otta. Good to see you. And don't forget, if you want to join the conversation, throw in a text there, and our guests will answer anything that you have there. And also to streams make glad. Streams make glad. Whoever you are, anyway, good evening to you as well. So you're very, very welcome to the program. Now, Donny, being that it's we all have children, or all have, I assume you have children. Maybe I'm wrong.
Yes,
but okay,
I
so
do.
we all have children, right? And most of the time we don't have ignorant children. But let's assume that this is written by an ignorant child. Do you and looking into the mind of an ignorant child, is this framework for future negotiations or effectively a deal in principle?
You know, to look at this thing, it makes no sense. It's hard to assess it in any context because it doesn't align with any of the initial, purposes for the war as stated by the Trump administration. So right there, it doesn't even reflect the reality of the reason for going to war. And then it also doesn't reflect anything that's consistent or even all-encompassing in terms of even addressing those issues, or how it's very vague. It's riddled with vagary. It's riddled with inconsistencies. It's very hard to understand how it could be seen as anything but something that was slapped together by people, by politicians trying to kind of, well, listen, we all know what or my assumption is that we understand that it's the Strait of Hormuz, which really changed the paradigm of this conflict, in the sense that the U.S. and Israel were doing a tremendous campaign of decimating their military capabilities. And unbelievably, I don't know how the Strait of Hormuz was not something that was either seized early. It's very hard to fathom as a non-military mind that the military people didn't know what we all knew, that this was something they were going to do. And so everything changed after that. The tone, the tenure, and even the spine of Trump changed, because now it was this desire to return to a state of having the strait open, which is a very sad thing, because when you look back at the reality, this strait was indeed open beforehand. That wasn't why we went to war. That was something they pulled out cleverly and unfortunately turned the tide of the war. So going back to go, even if it was perfect now, that's not, we're still dealing with the same vicious enemy that murdered, 40,000 people, that threatens the world with ballistic missiles and nuclear technology and terror proxies. So it's a frightening thing. I don't even know what to make with this MOU. It's a disgrace, frankly.
And Donny, how could an agreement like that be made, and Israel having no part in it, not being shown it until the last minute, and yet everything that's in the memorandum of understanding, even if it is written by an ignorant child, everything in it has a direct effect on Israel, one way or the other. It has a direct effect on the small little country of Israel. How is that even possible, that Israel could not be included in it? I mean, it just doesn't. I mean, I'm looking at it from abroad here, and I'm kind of saying to myself, what exactly is going on here? Because this affects Israel. How can they not be part of it?
It is astounding. It is astounding to see. And it places this whole relationship in this context that is very troubling to behold. Because here you have Israel, joining hand in hand in this very noble endeavor, appreciating the U.S., working together, loyal ally, and, Netanyahu, and I'm to the right of Netanyahu, so I can be quite critical of him, but he's only shown good grace to Trump. He's appreciative, and to be pushed aside after such friendship and alliance is astounding. It doesn't make sense. It's undignified. You see the way he also berates Trump and takes him out at the knees through these leaks while he's praising Erdogan and all these other monsters of the world. There's something very wrong here. And it's very troubling, because how could you betray someone who's been a genuine brother to you, a brother in arms in every sense, appreciative, working with you? It doesn't make sense. It's astounding.
I mean, because even Trump, even this week, saying Netanyahu knows who the boss is. I mean, that's not a friendship. When you wouldn't say
Yes.
that to your friend, would you?
Yeah, you would not. And it's funny because, it's almost a self-imposed wound, because in Judaism there's this concept of appreciation, or karat tov, and we want to appreciate when there are good people out there, Jew or non-Jewish, allies, friends, and because in the first term Trump did things that were very good for Israel, and it was unique in many sense. And so, but the problem was that I think many of the leadership, up to and including Bibi, they had this appreciation for him, but it became this adoration that almost bordered on something beyond that, and it lost its dignity at that point, because Trump appreciates strong men and tough men, and that love, all that all-encompassing love, and he's the most loving president. And then for him to turn this way, it speaks a little of perhaps Israel was a little too overblown. Appreciate. There's a concept of appreciation, but with self-respect. No other nation speaks this way. Of course, he's been a good friend to Israel, but he's not God. Even the most noble of men, and he has qualities, but he's not that. Is fallible, and so to present him constantly, I think was unhealthy for Israel's leadership. Now we understand where it came from. After Obama and Biden, it's to be appreciated. Nevertheless, we're seeing that can change, and we're seeing some very troubling things.
Yeah, because he has dressed up as the Pope, so he must clearly think he's closer to God than most people.
Yes,
Marco, just in relation to Israel and in this whole memorandum of understanding, and both of you can come in on this. Did Israel really let the ball drop, in the sense that they just didn't realize one of the things that Trump keeps on saying: we will do what's in America's interest? In some ways, that Israel dropped the ball there on that, and that's why we're seeing what we're seeing now.
One could say that to a certain extent. I would say, however, that what has happened should serve as a salutary lesson to Israel. Israel has to create room for maneuver. During the past 4 decades, it's been over-reliant on the United States, and this has been a self-induced alliance to a great extent. We could go back many years, we could go back many decades, where Israel made ludicrous concessions in which it has compromised its own security. So this should serve as a lesson to Israel. Now, some very good things have happened with President Trump, and we need to recognize that, but we should see it as something that's enabled us to come up for air. And I think Bibi, the Prime Minister, has realized that certain mistakes were made during the course of the years. And I've always believed this, and I've spoken about this with regards to our arms procurements and our arms industries. We should have had a much stronger arms base here in Israel. We should have continued developing aircraft as well. We should have taken a little bit care of our interests in this sense, and not pandered to the American desire to stifle our own aeronautical industry. So I think there is a lesson to be learned here. The Americans are good friends, but very often we have people who do not pull in the same direction, and we must be careful to pursue what we perceive to be our interests. Now, I recognize that most of our best friends are in the United States. This has to be said. But the situation is volatile. The situation in the United States, as in Europe, is volatile. Our support base has been eroded by decades of penetration by foreign money, especially from the Islamist states. That needs to be said. Okay. And of course, the unholy alliance with the progressive left.
Can I just say this? I mean, looking again from the outside, looking in, you say Israel needs to learn a lesson from this. this could be a very expensive lesson and a very dangerous lesson that Israel has learned.
Indeed, and
let me finish.
yeah,
Let me finish. Because what's happening now is, as you rightly said, he's cozying up to Erdogan. He's cozied up to the Syrian leader, and the memorandum of understanding is written by an ignorant child. We don't know where that's going. It's a thing. I put it to you that Trump, as good and all as he has left you guys in a more dangerous situation for the future than before the war.
Potentially, yes. He certainly kicked the can down the road. He hasn't solved anything for us, but we have been able to recover very well since the disaster of October the 7th. So the way I see this is as a window of opportunity. A window of opportunity whereby Israel can come up for air and mend those serious deficiencies which has plagued it for at least 4 decades. I would say even since the withdrawal from Sinai, which was another disaster whereby we eroded our deterrence, an absurd move. But certainly we need to learn the lessons. Unfortunately, we tend to learn the lessons the hard way. Let's hope we internalize them this time.
Donny, what do you make of that? Is it going to be an expensive lesson for Israel, or do you see anything good coming out of this?
Oh, I see good coming out of it, but I concur with Marco. These are excellent points. It's not easy. There are no easy solutions. It's a necessity. It is an opportunity to truly develop and emancipate ourselves in the best sense from complete reliance in these areas. Weapons and ammunition procurement, and the Lavi, I believe, was the name of the jet plane that was abandoned. Israel has technologies that it can, and this also helps in a self-respecting relationship. Much more, instead of say, this Hasbara notion of constantly defending what we bring. Of course, it's not. Israel doesn't just take. It gives tremendous amount, but let's create a respectful relationship that cannot be vulnerable to these bullying tactics, if you will. But it will not be easy, and perhaps it will be expensive. But Israel is certainly capable. Once again, we're not as vulnerable as we were as a fledgling state. We have tremendous abilities, thank God. It's not 1948 anymore. So we're not. Yeah. We're no. When we were truly alone in terms of independent of God, alone in the world, with very little allies, finding allies amongst the strangest of places. So it's not an easy decision. It won't be cheap, and it will, but it is necessary, and there's positive opportunities to grow from it. Yes.
Yeah, and just I suppose one of the good things that has come out of this is that Israel has broken that psychological barrier with Iran. In other words, they're in a position now to attack Iran, even without the US. So they're getting a number of refueling jets as well to help them. So that has to be a very big plus, does it not?
Oh, absolutely, I agree. And if I could just comment on one point, where the issue of mutual, one can be an ally without being aligned on every point. Of course, that's natural. The problem is in the machinations of Trump and the administration in the post-military aspect of this war is beyond that. I said, what happened if Trump bowed out and said, listen, we've set them back? It's the handcuffing of Israel that's problematic. It's the excluding us from these MOUs, absurd as they are, making these absurd demands contrary to your original desire to stop proxies. And now you're allowing Iran to still marry their cause with Hezbollah and refuse Israel the right to defend itself, without, of course, talking about Israel overreacting or hitting a target for every, for a drone, or undermining what ballistics are for people who live where neighborhoods can be destroyed by one. So it's yes.
Yeah. Now, moving to what Israel is thinking right now. I mean, obviously, they're clearly, if we're wide-eyed here talking about what's in that memorandum, the people of Israel must be very wide-eyed, because what's the feeling in Israel right now? How do people feel? I know you guys are just absolutely resilient. I mean, it's beyond imagination. it's miraculous how that's the way I look at it. It's miraculous how kind of resilient you guys are. But what are people feeling right now? Give me a sense of what people are thinking now when they see what's happening.
Donnie, do you want to take it?
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. Yes. If I'm not mistaken, and Mark, I'm sure you found a similar experience, there seems to be almost a universal understanding across the political divide that this is outrageous. Most Israelis want to see Iran destroyed, the IRGC, that is, to clarify it for us, to see the people liberated, to see a better world, a less dangerous world. It's very frustrating, and it's very interesting. You do see this transcends politics. Most Jews and Israelis seem to be in alignment on this, that this is a crazy MOU, that we're handing a victory and losing an opportunity, a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, perhaps.
Yes, I'm very much in agreement with Donnie.
Yeah, and what happens? This is the thing for me. What happens? There's a move to the right, obviously, in Israel since October the 7th. If that were to change and move back to the left, you guys could be in very serious situation, could you?
Yes.
Oh, yes. Well, I think, look, there has been a seismic shift within Israeli society. Unfortunately, and we've mentioned it for many a time, that the Oslo Accords were a national disaster. It wasn't simply about pulling out of territory. It was also about a question of mentality. Okay, so there were a whole load of attendant elements that accompanied Oslo. And I think we have to consider that the High Court was one of the elements. The media too were coming together to the Oslo Accords have to be understood in a different sense. It was the Oslo Accords were also something which attempted to change Israel from being a Jewish state to a state of all its citizens. It wasn't a peace-seeking endeavor in the real sense of the word. Any person with a little bit of sense could understand that you cannot make peace with monsters, and people, and certainly the intelligence services, knew with whom we were dealing. So I think when we think about Oslo, we have to think about a sort of a Kulturkampf, if we to paraphrase what happened in Germany 150 years ago. It was part of an internal struggle to disengage the state of Israel from being a Jewish state. Now, once you do that, you put aside Jewish values, which are the essence and are indeed the immune system of the state. They're the values, they're the navigational tools whereby you navigate reality. So Israel not only withdrew in a territorial sense, it also divested itself of those instruments whereby it could defend itself.
And has Israel's military successes created conditions that others are now exploiting diplomatically? I mean, let's take I digress for a second, just in relation to Israeli soldiers lost in these wars. I mean, the people of Israel must be very, very angry about that part.
You say something very interesting. That's what I want to connect to again, because when I mentioned Oslo, and I mentioned it wasn't merely about territorial retreat. It was retreat from a sound ethical value. What we had foisted on us, what the military had foisted on it, was the so-called purity of arms, whereby our enemies gained precedence over the value of our soldiers' lives. And indeed, this is still something that is present to this very day. Less so, but it needs to be excised completely from Israeli politics.
Yeah, because Donny, the young soldiers have been the real surprise in this war. It was a surprise. I'm talking about the children born in 2000s or whatever. They have really come to the fore. No, Israel could only be proud of them. Is Should they be starting to feel betrayed by the losses of their own colleagues, and when they're seeing what's happening now? Have they right to be angry and feel betrayed?
One hears frustration from combat soldiers. Of course, a good soldier has to mute it and has to deal with all these internal conflicts and the sacrifice, the loss. But there's frustration, of course, and what one hears from pundits where they hear from their sons and their combat units of a frustration, particularly when they feel they're being handcuffed. It's one thing to sacrifice people. We've all come, people are willing to sacrifice for a greater good. What we are not willing to be is cannon fodder or to be handcuffed either by external governments or even by our own leaders and the systems within that are indoctrinated with these perverse notions of false peace, of course, purity of arms, which are not pure, which cause innocent bloodshed.
Yeah, and those military gains, and there was significant military gains by Israel, both in Gaza and in Iran, in Lebanon, significant gains, and currently happening right now as we speak. And that must be very frustrating when it doesn't turn into political gain.
Oh yes, I mean, this perverted tactic of mowing the lawn, returning to the battlefield. But what one thinks, what happened? These gains were gained by souls that were lost, by heroic soldiers who died, and then they withdraw, and then another slew of soldiers returns to gain what was had, and then lose their lives. This is so perverse. This is immoral, and it's playing the enemy's game. And this is the kind of thing that can break morale, even amongst the strongest, most heroic soldiers, of which they are. And they truly were tested in fire and rose in the moment. But it's these frustrations of the inability to seize victory, big and small, and to seize on this, and to seize the territory, and to not return it, because Islam doesn't understand any other lesson. To return it is to acquiesce and to appease. They only understand power. And so, yes, this is frustration.
Absolutely. And Marco, kind of to see that does, as Donny says, it plays into the enemy's hands, doesn't it? And can damage morale.
Absolutely. Look, as we've mentioned many a time, Israel in defensive wars gains territory, and then it feels the need to refund our enemies for genocidal wars which is waged against. This is an absurd state of affairs. When an enemy with genocidal intentions loses, it loses. That has to be the moral of the story. And it has to express some kind of natural justice, not phony notions of international law that we hear about from the chattering classes at the United Nations, who, by the way, as we've said many a time, are waging a war against Israel. They are part of a genocidal complex.
I'll just go to Gustav. Gustav, good evening to you. Do you think Israel could achieve peace in Lebanon and finally finish the Hezbollah threat by political means? Any of you can take that.
Political means on their own don't really have too much value. Certainly one can form alliances. There are segments of the population there that don't want to have anything to do with Hezbollah. Only today it was brought to our attention that representatives of the Christian community had requested to be annexed to Israel with the attendant Israeli citizenship. This could be a very positive development, but of course we have the framework of the let's say agreement brokered by the United States, so I'm not sure whether that can take off at the current moment. But certainly there should be a lesson. When an aggressive country wages war, as it has done repeatedly, because we're not talking about a one-off, we're talking about recidivist nations on an ongoing basis that have waged war after war against the state of Israel since its very foundation. On a few years after it was welcoming into its midst survivors from the Holocaust. I think there should be a point at which we say enough is enough. Enough is enough. And we extend, at least we should bring this territory within Israel's security interests. At the very minimum, an Israeli security presence should remain.
Donny, have you anything to add to that, or are you?
Well said, Marco. Absolutely, these are the only lessons that can be learned. Are the ones that not to replicate the mistakes of the past, and to join hands with any available allies, such as they are in this case, the Christian communities who would wish to be aligned and free from this horror and these Nazis. That could be a very positive step. And absolutely, these must be integrated in some capacity. I would say, as communities, as army bases, certainly not to return as part of Israel, as part of. You went to war, you lost, and now we're going to be strong from these borders. Henceforth, this is Israel.
Now, Streams Make Glad there is after sending us in there to send us in 2 points there. One, the US-Israel joint venture was winning, which it was. We all knew it was winning. Why is the MOU even necessary? Is it deja vu for Israel to be in this situation? Well, clearly we're saying it is. It is deja vu again to find themselves in their security compromised, but in a better position to handle that. I'm imagining as well. Now, also, Streams Make Glad, Israel can't afford to have a long, drawn-out war. Israel could have finished the war without constant US interference. That's absolutely true. He's actually right there, isn't he?
Yes, he is certainly right. But yeah, he or she is certainly right. He or she or it or they, as they say nowadays. Yeah. Little joke, little levity.
Yeah.
Well, the truth of the matter is that Israel had no choice in a certain sense to have a long, drawn-out war, because strategically over the past 40 years, it placed itself in a situation whereby this was the enemy's strongest card, to draw it into a long, drawn-out war. It hasn't worked for the enemy, of course, but it's something that should have been avoided. The war has been going on for 3 years, almost, within a greater conflict of attrition, and it will go on even further, because as we see, we have other pernicious actors in the north. We have Erdogan and his jihadi proxy in Syria, and one mustn't forget the Egyptians as well, who are building up significantly in the Sinai for an enemy which we don't know whom it is directed against. Of course, that's a mystery, Donny, you will agree.
And don't forget the octagon.
Indeed, indeed, the recent.
Yeah. Okay. Let's move to the people of Iran. Okay, so we're saying there Israel are wide-eyed. Well, if Israel are wide-eyed, the Iranian people must be absolutely deflated completely, because they saw something. They saw something happening that was giving them hope. They couldn't move until it was safe to do so, but they saw hope, and next thing it was snatched from them. And just because we're talking about Ireland, I can tell you now that we're saying around 40,000 people were killed in those riots in early January and February, right? And I can tell you that the Irish mainstream media, and I'm sure European as well, paid scant attention to those deaths. In Iran, it was just mind-boggling how it barely even covered it, and if it was a third or fourth story. It wasn't a headline. I mean, I'm bewildered what type of world we're living in when we cannot see evil. And Donny, you might not be familiar with this, obviously, because our former president, Michael D. Higgins, he actually sent, when he was in power, he sent a lovely warm letter to the incoming president of Iran, and wishing him well and all of that. and the current president has also been in conversation with the Iranian regime president and whatever, and wishing them well and all that.
Unbelievable.
And I'm saying for up to 40,000 people killed. I mean, and the other thing before I get into the question on it, the other thing is that the Iranian people in general had, back in the decades, had in or hundreds of years, had a good relationship with the Jewish people going back. I mean, what do you guys feel for Iranian people when you see what's after happening?
Well, certainly they must feel betrayed, because certainly President Trump gave the nod. He winked and he said, "Go ahead, lads, and we'll be coming up the rear in some shape or form." And unfortunately, he came up the rear in a way which wasn't foreseen. That's the way they will perceive it. I think they will have a much greater respect for Prime Minister Netanyahu, who made sincere efforts, and I believe there are efforts afoot to certainly change the situation on the ground. I'm sure that Iranian society, there will be some very severe cracks within Iranian society, which will be very difficult for the regime to recompose. And I think the Iranians at this point will have more faith in Israel, because they see it, to a certain extent, they see Israel as a model. They see Israel as a country with which it could enter into a serious alliance if they manage to collapse this regime. Now, this is also another problem, because the Europeans don't want to see the Iranian regime collapse. Let us be perfectly frank. They've had vested interest for many years in propping up this regime. They find it very difficult to outlaw the Revolutionary Guards. There are a whole series of elements which bring us to believe that they have very little interest in toppling this regime. So yes, they will certainly feel very betrayed.
Donny?
Yes, I very much agree, Marco, that the sense of deflation, the promise, help is on the way. And one saw the excitement before the internet was taken down, and the sense that they had. If one watched these podcasts from either these expats with connections, Tusi TV, these are people who there was a fire in the air. They felt that something was going to change, and things were changing.
Absolutely.
And it was snuffed out. And perhaps one day we'll find out the horrors and the absolute numbers and the tortured and the murdered.
And Donny, at the very start of the war, there was a raft of regime killed, including Khamenei himself. There was a raft of people killed. Do you think, medium or long term, that will make a difference to crack the regime? That those coming behind haven't got the same experience?
That's a great question, because Trump says, "Oh, we have a new regime now." Stop playing this nonsense. When you have the same ideology, you can get rid of tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3. It's the same thing. Nevertheless, these were seasoned leaders. These were seasoned military minds and scientists and politicians. And the Ayatollah, rot in hell. Obviously, that's years of evil. That's not something that happens overnight. Say, way great people aren't born, evil people. They're formed over years, and they have evil knowledge and the ability to create horrible conditions. And so perhaps there's no doubt that taking away this leadership, I'm sure, will help erode. But it may not be so apparent at first, because we see they are surviving. There are plenty monsters left. They may not be as talented. They may not be as scientifically advanced as some of their top scientists, but they're still there. So I'm hoping that it did erode the foundation of their society, but it's yet to be seen to what degree that will be so, because there still are tiers 2, 3, 4, 5 of jihadists and would-be jihadists.
Yeah, and of course, going back to what you were saying, Marco, there is obviously things that we don't see, but there is things happening on the ground in Iran that could could change the situation for the people of Iran. And we're not going to, and I certainly not on this program, are going to go out and give a whole lot of hope to the people of Iran since it was dashed when they had a chance. But
Yes, of course.
but that killing of the regime, the main actors of the regime in the war, will certainly help matters on the ground to develop, will they not?
Yes, I believe there's good reason to believe that there are cracks there that will be very difficult to recompose, of course. But there are many variables here. There you have their allies waiting in the wings, the Russians, the Chinese, and whatnot, the Qatari money, which could well make its way there. So there are many variables. Obviously, I think Israel needs to make sure that any investment in Iran would be a very bad investment.
Okay. Now, moving to Lebanon, and let's go back to the MOU written by a ignorant child. Let's go back to that for a minute, because this is probably one of the most bizarre things, in my opinion, one of the most bizarre things to come out of this memorandum of understanding, because Israel was and is dealing with Hezbollah in Lebanon, has created security zones, moved north of the Litani River, and taken back land, not taken back, but seized land for security reasons that they hadn't had since 1983 or 82, whatever. And next thing, this MOU comes out, and there's one of the points, I don't have it here in front of me here, but one of the points in it is that there should be no attacks in Lebanon, and that Lebanon must be off limits. I mean, how is that even possible, guys? How is that? I mean, I'm looking in and saying to myself, what? I'm just agreeing with Donny. This had to be written by some child and given to the lads. Anyone take it?
Unbelievable.
Yeah.
Marco, would you like to go, or?
You go ahead, Donny. Give us your.
Yes, it's mind blowing. It doesn't. This was one of the primary reasons the war was justification for the war after the nuclear and after the ballistic threats were these terror proxies. This is Iran's right hand, Hezbollah. So what bothered me was the illogic. And again, it goes to the thing of how foolish this memorandum was. Who are you? We're supposed to suddenly forget that was one of the reasons for going to war, to stop these proxies, and now it's being conditioned, and we're now meant to, we're supposed to suspend that, and then still retain the notion that this administration is sticking with a consistent policy and isn't fumbling around because they don't really know what move to make next. I mean, it's very clear this is a pivot because they're frustrated. I mean, it doesn't even make sense. Proxies were part of the original reason to go to war with them. Proxies have taken the lives not just of Israelis worldwide, but of Americans, thousands perhaps over the years.
Indeed,
the barracks, the Marines that were blown up by Hezbollah.
Absolutely.
I mean, this is outrageous, and we're going to forget this and tie the hands. And even more upsetting was Trump's initial reaction. And of course, they muted it a little with these conditions. But initially, every time Israel responded, it was almost, we now have to apologize for self-defense, the most moral, basic act of self-preservation. Unbelievable.
Marco, bizarre, is it not?
I would say it is perverse. And that's why we need to develop our own independence, room for maneuver, find new allies. We have potential allies here in southern Lebanon among the minorities. We also have potential allies, very good allies in Syria as well among the minorities. And I think we should be extending our influence there, helping them. And indeed, we'll get a return on our investment because they'll also help us. But it has to be honorable because we have to say all the truth. We have to speak all the truth. In 2000, Israel abandoned the South Lebanese army when Ehud Barak hightailed it and left them stranded. And they had to run for their lives back to Israel. So honor is a very important thing in the Middle East. And the state of Israel hasn't always shown this capacity to do the honorable thing. And when you don't do that in the Middle East, people remember that. Honor is a very important thing. You defend your enemies. You defend your allies, sorry. You defend your allies. You defend your allies and you treat them as one of your own. That it has to be a blood covenant.
Now, you then look at so what we were looking at before this, I'm going to come to this trilateral agreement between the US, Israel, and Lebanon in a moment. But what we were looking at was a situation under the MOU only. Now, we were looking at a situation when Israel attacked in Beirut in the I'm sure I'm not pronouncing it right, the Daya area where Hezbollah's headquarters are. Trump went absolutely Trump went absolutely berserk with Netanyahu. Went absolutely berserk. You're ruining our agreement. You're ruining our agreement. And
your agreement, yes.
Yeah. It looked to I'm an ordinary Joe Soap. It looked to me and many other people saying that Israel's hands are going to be constrained here now, and they're going to be forced to withdraw because of this memorandum of understanding, because they've attacked. And next thing, the Iranians are jumping up and down and saying, we're not going to negotiate, even though, lads, they're not going to negotiate at all anyway, one way or the other. We know that, right? But next thing, out of the blue comes this trilateral agreement between Lebanon, the US, and Israel. And I'm wondering, is it something? Is it as simple as this? And Donny, I'll come to you with this. Is it something as simple as this, that they saw part of this stupidity of the MOU and said, look, we need to find a way of countering this and try and get the Lebanese to come on board? I mean, because that trilateral agreement has huge scope for peace. It really has. I think it has anyway, a real scope for peace. But was that a clever move by Trump? Or was that, or how do you see that? How that emerged?
Oh, I don't think Trump was playing 3D chess. I think that was more sensible minds, perhaps the voices of the Rubios and military minds and more pro-Israel thinkers in the administration muted that initial reaction. You know, because we know that in the Trump administration there are different voices. There's the Vance camp, which tends to be more associated with the isolationists, sometimes elements to the right of that. And Rubio has always been, and Hegseth have been a little more sensible military minds, diplomatic minds, understanding the real politic of the reality and the morality of Israel's fight in that region. And I don't think it was something that this is some 3D chess that Trump was playing. I think it was some of the better minds and probably some of the voices, perhaps some of the evangelical supporters and pro-Israel voices, leaning and putting their pressure to mute and kind of walk it back, if you will, because it was outrageous. And but I don't think it was something that this was all part of some 3D chess. Unfortunately, I wish it were so. I don't think it was so,
though. What do you think of that, Marco?
No, I'm very much in agreement with Donny. I don't think there was some superior mind with great omniscient powers orchestrate. No.
Let's talk about Rubio and Vance for a minute. I see Rubio as being a very he'd be a very advantageous person to Israel rather than Vance. I think, would he not?
I believe so. Vance is an interesting. Vance. People have had, even conservatives who support Trump now, forget about his recent pivot with Israel, but people say like Mark Levin was a very staunch supporter, a conservative thinker, a Jewish American. And he initially, years back, because he was a genuine conservative, he was reticent about supporting Trump. But since Trump came into power the first time, he's been very loyal to him. And he's a voice that's appreciated Trump's, at least his understanding of the world when his instinct seems to be in line. So Rubio is more of that classical conservative Republican sense of the Middle East and of Israel's role. Vance is someone. So my point was, while people like Mark Levin once were critical on policy, Vance years ago had some very harsh things. He likened him to like a Hitler figure. Vance is not a true conservative. He's much more of a populist, and he rode in on that wave. You know, I spoke with a lot of friends of mine when Trump won this last term. People thought it was this great right-wing conservative revival, and it wasn't such. There was a desire to get rid of Biden and not bring in Kamala Harris, but it wasn't this great revival of conservative thinking. It was an umbrella that came in, and a lot of it was misfits and malcontents. There were good people as well, and there were moderate, Reagan Democrats, if you will, but there were people also, and one knew that if they went to war with Iran, a lot of these ugly elements would come out. And I'm not saying that he's a little too polished. I'm not going to say it's hard to know precisely. It's more his associations, Vance. But he's got some troubling ideas and ideas of isolationism, and some of his associations are troublesome. And indeed, I do think Rubio is a finer character, a finer man, and his policies are much more sound and in line with normative conservative principles, if you will.
Now, Trump has not only scorned but scorched Obama and Biden in relation to their Obama's deal with Iran in the last decade, and he has really gone to town on them. But has Trump snatched defeat from the jaws of victory here? Is he going to make the same mistakes as Obama, except in a very different way?
Parker, would you like to feel about this?
It's not impossible. He may snatch defeat, or he may be forced to take serious action. So it's very much open-ended at the moment. I mean, certainly the Iranians have been taken. I mean, this is what we should hope that Trump's aversion to being taken for a ride kicks in at some stage, and this is what the Iranians have been doing very ably at the moment. So if they push it a little bit too far, he may kick up a storm. I suppose that is a possibility. Look, I see it as with regard to Israel, it's a moment. I never nurtured too great expectations with regard to Trump. I've always felt that it's wrong for Israel to go down this path. I'm certainly appreciative of the good he's done, but I did always feel there would be a limit.
Okay. Yeah, Donnie?
Yes, I had the same sentiments when the war first started, and this great appreciation, and when they were working together with America, but this nagging sense that Trump is going to stop it prematurely at some point, that some sort of trigger, survival trigger, and listening to those other voices are going to kick in. I was very worried about that, so I didn't put too much stock. And so, while I appreciate the good that did come out of it, I was very worried, not to this full extent. I didn't think we would see this. But again, it's too premature to know precisely what will happen. I guess what Marco and I would certainly agree with is that Israel has to seize the moment and understand that it's a sovereign nation with its own destiny. We have to have a belief in God and a belief in ourselves and a self-respect to do what's in our best interest for survival, and to appreciate when our causes are aligned with the U.S. Of course, one appreciates working with an ally, but not to be dependent, and to understand that we may have to do things alone.
And just back to Lebanon for a second. If that trilateral agreement and there's huge scope in it, it's not automatic that it's going to work, but there's huge scope in it. If that situation was resolved and Hezbollah was disarmed and moved out, become a non-actor, become not an actor anymore in Lebanon, how significant would that be for Israel in the Middle East?
Well, some very serious engineering would need to be done for that eventuality to take place. I think one would have to move the Shiite population permanently from southern Lebanon. I think it would be madness to entertain the idea that a population which was very much in cahoots with Hezbollah, one cannot speak of an innocent civilian population anymore. This is a European and a Western misconception. The terrorists were nestling within this society. They were very much woven within the fabric of this society, as was the case and is the case in Gaza. Okay? That's not to say everybody was a delinquent, but on the whole, we have to think of it as something organic. It is something that exists and is an expression of the society.
Okay. And just back to the MOU again, and one of the final things in it, again, I don't have it in front of me, but one of the final points in it is, and this would worry me now, and I'm sure you guys have an opinion on this, where Iran and America have agreed that if they don't agree to something in 60 days, that it can be extended. That's not good, is it?
No, it is not, and it likely will, because one gets the sense, a lot of pundits have opined that Trump he's very concerned with the midterms, and this is not going to get resolved. Certainly not at this pace. It will be extended. There's simply no other way. The can must be kicked a bit further because Trump needs to get to the midterms.
Yeah.
And I think it will be extended. I think twice it will be extended.
Yeah, but the Iranians are good at this, aren't they?
Oh, they're masters at this. This is this notion that Trump, he's a deal maker, perhaps in the Western world of business. Yes, you're dealing with people who have a whole different mindset. They don't think in terms of decades, but centuries and theology. And he's not going to outlast them in this. We see he couldn't outlast them with the Strait of Hormuz.
Now, let's look at this politically now, because there's obviously an election coming up in Israel in November, if not earlier. But now I'm looking at, I'm just going to say it. I'm looking at the likes of Lapid. To me, I read a lot about him. To me, he comes across as a complete moron. That's what I think of him. A complete.
You should have
moron.
seen the father. His father was a real winner.
Yeah. Now, it's very, very, and I know you're saying you're to the right of Netanyahu, but
yes.
How do you see? Okay, so Netanyahu, do you believe that should continue based on the current situation that Israel is in? Do you believe that Netanyahu is the right person to bring it forward, or what do you think?
That is a great, but Marco, perhaps you want to field that first?
No, I want you.
You want me to field it first?
Yeah,
okay,
I want you to go, yes. Donny. I want you to, because I mentioned that you were to the right of Netanyahu, so I just want to see what your thinking on it is.
So, practically speaking, he's probably the only one capable of becoming prime minister or remaining prime minister in terms of on the right. I'm more inclined, and I didn't always support him. There's a thinker, Moshe Feiglin, but I don't say who's very strong on matters of security. He's a seasoned politician. He's been in the Knesset, but he's never been anywhere near to this kind of power. I would like to see him in a coalition, and I'd like to see his viewpoint, his party, Zahut, in it as well. It's unlikely that he would be prime minister, but ideally, he's a thinker. He's someone who has a little more sophisticated notions of Jewish identity in the modern state of Israel. But in the absence of that, I think, of course, naturally, and the only true solution would be Netanyahu, because the alternative will be either Bennett, Lapid, or someone else. It's unlikely anyone else would come in. And flawed as he is, he has leadership. He should be encouraged. And I would be glad for him to succeed in every way possible. And I want to support my prime minister, and I want him to be successful in crushing our enemies and in strengthening Israel. I do not want anyone to the left of him to get into power, God forbid, because they may speak tough and they don't like him. And again, I've had my differences with him, but they will do no such thing. They will return to the path of the old, and we will see even more appeasement and more of the old policies of destruction.
Marco, I know you have a view on this. So,
my view is very much in line with Donny, because there's a convergence of views here. I have great admiration for our Prime Minister, notwithstanding also some of my differences, and Donny will be aware of that. I would have liked to have seen a little more assertiveness in certain matters, certainly territorially, and with a certain vision of things. And I'm very much in agreement with Moshe Flegin with regard to that. So I think we're pretty much aligned on that. As I mentioned before, and Donny just expressed it now, in reality, for the right, Benjamin Netanyahu is the only man in town, in the sense, who can cobble together a coalition, which I hope will include Moshe Feiglin as well, because he has very interesting ideas. They're ideas that I've always held, by the way, and I'm sure Donny, any common sense Jew will basically hold these views. That invites the question as to why Moshe Feiglin wasn't elected in the past. Well, he served in the Knesset once. Why he could not be prime minister? And of course, the times have to mature in a certain sense. With the Jewish people, unfortunately, sometimes we learn lessons the hard way. So I think, hopefully, Benjamin Netanyahu will win the next election and cobble together a wide center right wing. Let's use the word right wing coalition. And then we'll enter a period of transition in which views such as Moshe Fleiglin's and Donny Fuchs and mine come more into the mainstream. And there's a greater awareness and understanding that these are the policies that need to be pursued.
Now, can I just ask you guys, because your sense, your type of government is a little different than ours, or is it just Netanyahu? So just tell me this, because I'm looking in and I'm watching the decisions that are made, and Netanyahu seems to be the boss. He is the boss. It's not a case of, okay, so in Ireland, we can't. I will not dare compare my prime minister with the Israeli prime minister. No, I won't. I won't even go there. But I'd say this. Okay, so what happens is there's a cabinet meeting every Tuesday morning, and all the ministers feed into that cabinet and their ideas or whatever like that. And next thing, they come out and announce them, and they never say. It's never left to the prime minister to say, or minister saying, well, look, we have to see what minister saying we have to see what the prime minister thinks, or in this case, the Taoiseach, which is what the Irish word for prime minister, Donny, for your benefit. But I'm looking at Netanyahu, and he definitely is in 100% control of the government. Is that the same with all leaders? Is that the way Israeli politics is? That whoever the prime minister is, they are the boss. Is that the way it works?
Marco, would you like to field it? You've been here more years. You've seen more governments than I have.
When did you make Aliyah?
I made Aliyah 17 years ago.
You're not too far behind.
That's about,
yes, he does certainly carry great authority. The problem is with a center-right government that you always have to contend with the judiciary and the deep state and the higher echelons of the army, which are generally conditioned by certain types of views. And this is why I admire the prime minister as well, because he's also had to fight on the internal front. We're not just talking about external enemies, we're talking about elements within the Israeli institutions who have consistently put a spanner in the works. And the way he kept all these balls in the air is certainly admirable. Look, basically, in theory, it works pretty much like any republic. Put it this way, in theory.
And does he? Because I would imagine that some Israeli people believe that the way Netanyahu works is that he compensates on one front by becoming tougher on another. Is that how you see him? How he works?
Donny,
how I see him, I've looked at him, very critically over the years because I've often been frustrated with him. He's a talented man. He has a brilliant mind. Like his father, he's a student of history. His father was a trained historian. He's a historian. He sees things on a level that most leaders do not. So he has lots of abilities. I've often felt that he hasn't been his best self, and there's lots of reasons for that. I think also to a large degree, he's not a class. Politics are very different. Like the right wing, unless you're religious right wing in Israel, it's not the same as in America where you might have an evangelical or religious right wing. He's quite socially liberal on a lot of issues that I, as a religious Jew, don't always agree with. But fundamentally, on the issues of security, he's classical Likud, and so I do believe, I guess, over the years, his greatest strengths have been, at least in terms of his ability to bring to help Israel, wean Israel away from the pure socialism. He's helped to bring capitalism, perhaps protectionist, but far better than it was, and to be stronger on the security. Obviously, October 7th showed deep-rooted problems, but that's always been Likud's claim to fame, that we'll be strong on security, that if nothing else, we're not going to advance the Oslo Accords, perhaps not ending them as they should have entirely, but a muting of it. And I think he's become more right-wing in that regard, certainly post-October 7th, after the barbarism. He's tried to juggle these balls, and it's not an easy task. So I do appreciate that. Yeah.
And is it? I look in from abroad and look in at Israel, and I see the absolute venom. Now, I mean, I see venom in our own parliament here, but nothing like what I see in Israel. Nothing. I mean, we discussed this last week, Marco, where some people despise the prime minister so much that they would actually they'd compromise the security of the state to get rid of him.
Indeed, it is a derangement syndrome whereby they sacrifice the state as long as they could get the prime minister. Unfortunately, it is a collective derangement syndrome among these people. It is amplified, it is compounded by the fact that the prime minister has been very capable as well. He's frustrated these designs.
And just on that, I was going to ask, because of that poison, if you like, that's what I can describe it as.
Yes.
Is it very difficult to be a prime minister in Israel when you have that going on? Is that very difficult to govern?
Yes.
Donnie, do you want to have a go?
Sure. Yeah, I think we would agree that it's an impossible task. It's not a task easily adopted. What he's gained experience over the years that you just don't gain overnight, or even in the case of Bennett, in one term. Mistakes that he made in the first time, he's certainly not going to correct. So I mean, the venom that is hurled at him, one would think that he's some right-wing incarnate, that he's a caricature of a right-wing, of an extreme right-wing, of which he's not. They demonize him as if he was a monster, as if he was, in their eyes, they see him as some deranged caricature of the right. He's not. He's quite moderate in many ways. But this is the hatred. And this goes back to the origins of Israel, the deep-rooted hatred on the extreme left of the right wing and of, revisionist Zionism.
Is it also jealousy?
Without doubt. He's certainly a very talented person. And I think his rivals are very much Lilliputian compared to him.
Okay, I'm gonna ask one final question, and we're going to call it a night then. With everything that's going on with Israel and Lebanon and Israel and Iran and all the various fronts that they're on, and seeing what's going on, and there's no guarantees of any decent security for Israel, except that they make it themselves. Is an American base, would an American base in Israel be a deterrent or not? Donnie?
deterrent for Israel. No?
Precisely. God bless America. We should have a good alliance and remain strong with them. I vociferously oppose any base, permanent or temporary, in Israel. God bless America, where we can join hands with them and fight together. That's a wonderful thing. But I do not want to see an American base. That would relegate us, truly, in every sense of the word, to be a vassal state, of which we cannot be and are not. Yeah. Yes, I mean,
absolutely. It's
that would be a nightmare for Israel. We will not. We've been discussing, and Marco has articulated very eloquently this desire to truly strengthen ourselves and seize the opportunity. This would be 10 steps back. This would be like the worst nightmare that we could fathom.
Okay, lads. I think we're going to leave it there. My thanks to Donny Fuchs and to Marco Alexander for joining us tonight from Jerusalem. Whatever one's view of Donald Trump, Benjamin Netanyahu, the Iranian regime, or the diplomatic process itself, one thing is clear: the Middle East has entered another period of profound uncertainty. Many Israelis are asking whether military achievements are being matched by diplomatic outcomes. Many Iranians are asking whether their hopes for change have once again been deferred. And policymakers across the region are trying to determine whether this emerging framework represents a genuine path to stability or merely a pause before the next crisis. As always, the answers are rarely simple, and the consequences often become clear only with time. Thank you for joining us on the Green Zone Updates from Jerusalem. And if you're enjoying tonight's discussion, please subscribe, comment, and share the program. Your support helps us to continue bringing informed, professional voices from Jerusalem and beyond to audiences across Ireland and around the world. And the only thing I'm going to say to you next week, we're having a break from talking about the Middle East next week, because next week's show, we're talking about transgenderism in Ireland. And we're going to be joined by Marco, help me here. Elaine Mullally, who is the founder of the Independent Ireland Party. She ran unsuccessfully in the last general election in Ireland, but she's going to join us because she has a lot to say on social issues in Ireland. So that's next Sunday at 7 p.m. Irish time. Stick around. Until the next time, stay with us, and always, as I say, subscribe, and thank you indeed, and good night, and shalom.